I'm just going to go ahead and read part one of chapter one of Rose Colored Glasses. Joseph Rocky Murfin, part one. Only the largest, most important dreams could bring change to a world where nobody seemed to sleep. Warping through a small, round, beautifully shining light is the first memory David could consciously remember. Every night, as he grew up, David had a shared dream within his multitude of dreams he dreamt. Every single night, he shared one of the same dreams his father dreamt. Every night, David's father seemed to dream the same dream as his father. This connection did not go any further than that, as far as they knew. But they did know exactly who to blame. David's grandfather had always been a self-decided sculptor, inventor, magician, creator, tinkerer, carpenter, whatever he decided to be on any random adventurous day. However, on a particular night, this one shared dream started to trickle down into one single haunting nightmare. A nightmare that has followed their family for 2 generations so far, as to say too much. If you have ever wondered why sometimes you cannot remember your dreams after waking up, fear not. You may learn something new about yourself. This specific nightmare, however, has a set of rules it has followed since David's grandfather somehow started the whole thing, and has never been broken since, only getting worse as time preposterously moves on. Lately, the main rule the dreams seem to follow is they're always based where we feel safest in the waking world. This may be in your home, school, work, anywhere you know well. The second rule these dreams always seem to follow: the dream feels ultimately real. As it happens, better to trick you into thinking you're awake. The third rule is to avoid the shadows and the shadowy people themselves, especially their eyes. This may be a bit of a stretch, but there may be a connection between your dreams, reality, and these shadowy monsters too. Dare to believe encountering one may leave you waking up delirious, completely unaware you had ever been asleep. The worst part, they can morph in your subconscious into the very people you believe to recognize in your dreams. Lastly, this is information gathered by David's grandfather, or possibly just a fool within his world of studying sleep, who came up with his own idea of sneaking around these shadows. He focused what he thought were months worth of nights on figuring out how these shadows in one's mind could do such a thing. As he was nearing the state of his apparent madness, he had decidedly prepared to drug himself to sleep much longer than normal by using small amounts of strong sedatives. This is when the first incident began. He managed to abduct a smaller than normal shadow person, or dream demon, or Draymon for short, to perform experiments on in his own dreams. Yearning to learn, he started with the eyes. These specific eyes shined in a near-perfect pink rose color. Not specifically known for these shadowy figures, but he wanted them for himself ever since he met their ultimately familiar gaze. Out of nowhere, his mind is spun in a loop. He finds himself trying to gather his thoughts. A glint of a dream crossed paths with his thoughts as he managed to remember. He had remembered almost every dream since his self-induced coma, including the dreams of meeting other shadowy creatures before waking suddenly. The sensation of remembering something forgotten shook his very being. The realization of where he is and where he will be. That must have been a message meant for another day, he thought. He was in bad shape as he tried to recollect himself. He shook off the lingering thoughts. Out of accidental despite, He finds himself hovering over the figure, warping and warbling over a slightly clean table, desperately trying to escape, but every second proved no success. The eyes sit still within the mass of shadows that's thrashing about. It was the simplest task. It was as if a child could do it. He used a hand-carved ladle to scoop the eyes out. As it turns out, it was as easy as scooping bones out of some homemade soup. The rest of the experiments were cut short due to the body disappearing right before the thing's very own eyes. Compared to other shadowy people he had experimented on, they simply disappear along with the eyes, waking him up synchronically. Unknowingly, the eyes he managed to claim for himself glowed brighter than before, sparkling every so often with a light brighter than he could stand. This is when David's grandfather really started messing with things in his dreams. He treated his waking life like a bother and slept up to sometimes 20 hours a day, using an ever-growing variety of medicines. Luckily, David's father was born months before this, or David may have never lived to experience his own fascinating times. Many may be wondering why he instinctively went after their eyes first, although it turns out even he didn't know. The fact that the body disappeared after he managed to nab them simply proves these shadows aren't shadows, but sentient eyeballs. Maybe something else altogether. A long time in the dreaming world had passed. The eyes he carried shined in a beautiful hue. The longer he had them in his possession, the more potent their power became, like becoming denser without changing size, as if the shadow was emanating an ever-growing aggression over time, through its extracted eyes. The next couple days as he awoke from his slumber, he had no memory of what had occurred during his dreams. He had always believed himself to remember his dreams up until now. His journals have been filled and filling up for years at this point. He hadn't realized the time difference in the waking world compared to his dreaming world he entered, created. Rustling. He began to worry a shadow had been following him in his dreams without his knowledge. This wouldn't stop him from continuing his dream life, though. He continued to sleep up to 20 hours a day to his knowledge, knowing he was pushing it. However, in reality, he sometimes slept for weeks at a time. While he slept, his memories of his dreams all came back, always relieved while asleep, usually dumbfounded in his waking life. It's as if his mind was only truly working while he slept. Really, what a waste of a waking life, he frequently groaned. Years passed. This forced him to experiment and study the eyes themselves even more. These two eyes seemingly couldn't be too far apart without one managing to come back to the other. David's grandfather once told his son a story during the rare occasions they were awake at the same time. It was about two glowing orbs he had called souls, which could never be apart. He stated that he created a room to place one in, and another room to place the other orb in. Every single time he went to check on one, it was with the other. Either one room was always empty or had two glowing spheres. He chuckled and called this phenomenon love, or the embodiment of love. Moreover, things meant to be together are simply meant to be together, he says confidently, before laying back down and slowly falling asleep without another word, leaving his son to think alone in the darkness of his father's bedroom. This is The Absurdity of Rose-Colored Glasses, Chapter 1, Part 2. Every time he visited both worlds scheduled by his medications, he's excited to return to his claimed kingdom he called sleep, as his yearning for life in his waking state weakens out almost exponentially day by day. One night, As David's grandfather slept, he was suddenly pushed out of his dream by what he could only name a fleeting memory. His heart was racing. He was gasping for air and sweating profusely with no memory of what had occurred. However, he felt a dense, smooth marble in his left clutched hand. Although he slowly turned to look at his other hand as he saw the slightest glow emanating from it. Then suddenly he realized he was carrying a small but heavy glowing orb in each hand. He had no idea what they were, but as he looked closer at them, and eventually through them, he could see his white sheets were a somber green. He moved one sphere to his eye and gazed into the world. Immediately the sphere dropped, and his face showed shock and awe. As the sphere rolled on the floor, a slow pattern of footsteps grew louder from outside of the room. A questioning young boy swung open the door that paid the horrified man no attention. The boy's eyes spotted the sphere immediately, as it was the main source of light inside the overly dark room. He bent over to pick it up, and as he did, he noticed a second one in his hand. "Oh no," was all the boy managed to mutter to himself before the man in bed came to, and suddenly lunged towards the young boy. "I told you not to come in here," said the man as he snatched the spheres. He managed to grab one small sphere, but the other flew across the room and bounced against a wall and floor until finally rolling to a stop. Before the two's very eyes, the second orb started rolling into view from behind the first. A very eerie silence filled the room, as David's grandfather had an unsettling feeling of deja vu. His hands are empty. As David's grandfather tries to get up from his current position, he realizes he is too weak. He cannot remember how long he's been asleep or how old he is. He just knows his name is Rocky Joe Murphin, and his son is much older than he remembered. "How old are you?" he questioned with authority. "I'll be 9 in 3 days," a small voice answered. 3 years, he said with a soft gasp. "No, 3 days," the young boy chuckled. He looked around with tears forming in his eyes. It's been 3 years since the last remembered memory of his own child. Rocky tries his best to lift himself enough to stand, but is interrupted by his son, Jimmy. Jimmy Murphin turns out to be awfully strong for a child, and manages to lift his father up with seemingly little help from Rocky himself. He sat his father back onto the bed slowly. That's when Rocky Joe realized he was a lot bonier than he remembered. He lifted one arm up close to eye level and with his other hand placed his fingers together around the thickest part of his arm. There was still room within that circle. The fact is, a lot has changed in his waking world, and he can't remember any dreams at that moment either. A tear finally flows down his cheek, narrowing the gaze from Jimmy, showing the frustration in his dad's eyes. A sudden, frightful instinct hit them both at the same time. The orbs! They both promptly lurched forward, but only Jimmy managed to physically retrieve them. Hanging on the bed, but barely, Rocky holds his hands out for them, and Jimmy places just one in his father's hand, and turns and calmly walks out of the room, leaving Rocky puzzled. Seconds later, before Rocky could look at his hand, his son comes running back with a huge smile on his face. He's holding up both shining marbles above his head, but stays silent before placing them both in his father's hand. The weakened man immediately held one up to his eye to look at Jimmy, but he must have run off in a hurry. He was gone. My child could lift me onto the bed? He thought fleetingly. Then without hesitation he intended to peer down into the pink hue in his hand, but stares with his eyes widened instead, shocking even himself with an absurd memory. of writing and illustrating a shabby unpublished book for a lifelong friend, the start of his proudest secret achievement. Unbeknownst treasure? Or some haunting rewards? He contemplates to himself before his skinny arm collapsed beneath him, weakening out all thoughts suddenly. While he dreamt, he slowly regained consciousness into his own state. A sense of blindness is apparent, but is shrugged off as darkness playing tricks on him. He reaches into his pocket as his habits have regulated, but his heart seems to beat inside his stomach for a moment. The orbs he had in his possession are gone. How could that even be possible? He had just retrieved them for himself a few weeks ago, according to his own thoughts. Who stole them? A dark, damning thought came across his mind. Presently, a black mist seemed to be forming around him as he remembered the extraction of the eyes. He ponders on his provocations, wondering if they were worth his years of study. If only he knew he had accumulatively slept for a near decade at this current point. The 3 long years he understood to be the actual date and time were very, very misaligned with reality. All he ever seemed to do was visit the dream world, believing he had time remaining to return. But 10 extremely dragging years in the waking world proved to be disruptive. His son was almost 10 years old by the end of all this. His mistake may remain unfounded for even decades to come at the rate he chose for himself. The waking world news is nothing compared to one subconscious, urgent news, sadly became his waking life creed. The thought of replying to that was always an obvious groan, but his son proved to ask the correct questions on many occasions in the rare times his father was awake. His son had simply asked what urban news was this time. The tangent that had followed was continued by echoed groans, although he only viewed a son determined to absorb as much knowledge as possible. This was around the time Jimmy was explained what love is by his father, before either of them saw the orbs or marbles or eyes in their shared waking world. How he hadn't realized the time paradox when it comes to dreaming is beyond reasoning. It's as if he was fighting reason itself. The way anybody without expertise would study sleep, paying attention to the time spent asleep would seem second nature, even elementary. Denial can only reach so far. Rocky had always been hard-headed, though he believed himself to be strong-willed. His way of learning had always been diving head first while boasting of never hitting solid ground. His thoughts and confidence had grown to absorb his follies, but within himself, they absorbed him as well, though he would never admit it. Anything he wanted done, he did himself, no matter the cost. He feels himself plucking out 2 floating eyes with a tool he had spent an entire dream carving meticulously complex necessities needed for such a job. A ladle is all he could think to call it, while prodding to comply with his own moral of surgery he had planned. He had then realized what he'd done. He managed to hurt something within himself, unrealistically killing something in a fashion unknown. He labeled himself an internal murderer, knowing of a fate he can't ignore within himself. Luckily enough, this being was not initially a part of himself, but grew alongside him. He instantaneously felt sympathy, maybe even a deep sense of empathy for these creatures he had secretly named Dreamans in his journal. It was a scientific relationship before his one insane idea he acted upon. He thought back to when he accomplished the feat. That was too easy, he pondered to himself. The room had slowly grown much darker, as if blindness had overcome him without his knowledge. He shifts and is jolted by the feeling of being watched. He finally, as if being judged for it, noticed a great being with great consciousness with what he could not speak to or fully understand. Is this thing alive? Could it talk? He thought. It seemed to be nothing, but its presence is ominous to say the least. Is this the shadowy figure he once knew? Is it out for revenge? His eyes widen as he conjures his best ability to embody diplomacy. The eyes, is that what you desire? I don't have them in my possession. What'll happen to me? I'll do what I can instead. He dared to ask, maybe even demand. The shadow began to appear red with a hearty vengeance, as if to smile without smiling. And just like that, disappeared into nothingness within the cracks of shadows appearing where they wouldn't dare in the waking world. He then began to ask himself where the orbs could possibly be. The number of questions he carried would kill anyone else, he thought. However, he managed to get a hint of whatever that thing was. The feeling of unrecognized memories rushed over him as he regained some of himself back. There's no other possibility. They must be in the waking world. A sudden, obvious slideshow of thought hit him all at once. He then looked at himself and had the slightest fear of not looking how he expected. After taking a full checklist of himself, he declares, "I'm me after all." He is truly unaware. He has lost himself completely. He seemed to be in shock of the past, suddenly realizing he could see clearly. The shadows in his vision cleared out along with the mental smoky red smile he felt. These are important words, even though he believes he has lost his precious orbs. The importance of staying alive proves more important in sleep than the waking world to him. He is a weak, decrepit man in the waking world, but here he is unknown by even his closest friends, a part of a dark secret even he may regret keeping after his death. Most people who knew Rocky Joe worried for his being, as he secluded himself in his studies enough to harm him and his own reputation. He may possibly have lost himself in search of himself. Nobody is real in the dreaming state, only faces of faintly recognized people, a haze of personality. He has created his world himself, detailing it to his heart's content, and is only fascinated to control it for centuries. These pink orbs will forever be his downfall. Yet he may never know what has happened to him. He remembers scooping the eyes out with ease, thinking how tough the task could have been. He suddenly remembered sheets of a specific green warped and altered enough to know he shouldn't be able to put the two worlds together. After what seemed like weeks of what he may have called freedom, Rocky Joe Murphin viewed what he thought was a mountain, casually strolling further into the distance. He sprinted out to see the sight clear. The sight was of a small child carrying a mountain on its shoulder. This mountain was especially dark, covered in shadows emanating from every which corner predicated. He could then sense what the mountain contained, or rather, consisted of. The mountain itself was a dark, shadowy, live mass of figures. But the child could lift the mass with ease. Then the child turned around, already carrying a smile. Suddenly, something inside Rocky's imagination burst, as if he stared at the shadow too long. It swallowed his vision completely. Rocky decided then and there he never had to worry again. He had finally met satisfaction. A deep-seated thought of hope overcame him. He had the striking thought that he ultimately would have an equal that would exceed and outlast him. He simply had nothing more to do. He hadn't grasped the thought about what would happen if he kept messing with a world he could never make sense of. The following of that vision had begun a beginning of some sort of end. Sometimes a small sound unheard of will continue to grow until the impending boom is heard. The boom was heard as fast as anybody could understand, and most may never understand. This may be an avalanche proving to erase and start over, an iceberg showing what little it can and hiding precious information below, or an all surrounding feeling of impending doom or ending, yet staying auspiciously calm. Rocky Joe Murfin died in his sleep shortly after this life deciding vision. He was a mere 36 years old, believing himself just over 30. 6 years he will never get back. His last thoughts were of hope, gratitude, sadness, gratefulness, and lastly, helplessness. He knew he hadn't been fulfilled, but believed he still could be, even after death. This is The Absurdity of Rose-Colored Glasses, Chapter 1, Part 3. Presently, his 9-year-old son attended his funeral in the waking world. After months of sleeping soundly, many more months of failing organs, and a night full of tears, an entire year around the sun has passed to the exact day of the funeral. People walk by the casket without recognizing the man, only his name. From what Jimmy could overhear, most of the attendees knew him as the youngest professional in their world of study. They were all older than him, but Rocky looked as if he could be their father too. He was exceedingly pale. Even the morgue workers had a hard time blending a lifelike mixture of colors. His gauntly face was burnt into Jimmy's young mind. Even though Jimmy seems to fully understand what is happening, he shows no emotion. He was told not to worry by his father, possibly his last words to his boy. He never truly knew his father as well as he wanted, and now he believes he never will. He had become a lowly boy, feeling as if he had grown up without any positivity. Only negative thoughts filled his mind. His subconscious had disrupted his negativity plenty of times, but Jimmy was focused on this terrible day he may never fully understand. He didn't want to understand. All he had were two shiny orbs that would appear whenever he felt discouraged, believing them to be a part of his father now, always returning to him for some reason. Little did he know how true that may have been. Little did he know how important the orbs are to him specifically. After the ceremony filled with people he didn't recognize, he found himself inside his father's car with a woman driving them both home. 3 days until your birthday. Aren't you excited? A familiar but daunting voice asks. Jimmy stares down at his clothes, noticing how clean-looking yet how old they were. He's had them for a year now. They shouldn't look this new or fit this well, he thought. James? The voice rang louder. Jimmy is woken up from his mind and without thinking asks, "Why do I gotta wear black to these funeral things?" "Oh, honey, ask when you're older. I know with him gone, nothing is quite right, but we should be just fine," she coldly explains. These words stuck with young Jimmy. Nothing she would have said could have been worse at that specific time. His stepmother has always been cold, but how could she just dismiss his father's death like that? He stretches out the pocket of his black coat and sees a dim light emanating from it. While taking a deep, slow breath in and a quick, bitter exhale out, he made sure to match the coldness of his mother without a word. She asks him if he's hungry, but only a small humph is heard as a reply. Both people are not quite thinking right, blaming each other for circumstances neither of them understand or could ever control. They were driving home when she asked again, "Are you excited for your birthday?" "No," he replied with no emotion in his voice. You don't want to do anything special? She digs. No, thank you. He replies, determined to distance himself. Okay, but we're going to have family over tonight, so be on your best behavior, she says with a snappy tone, digging deeper. The rest of the car ride home was mostly silent. He never registered what she said. He was trying to keep the ambient silence before the conversation started. Even the radio may have been too much. The good news was, when the rain made a sound with each splash, it was like a new member of an orchestra would start playing and beautifully complicate the entire song being played. The beauty of the randomness of it all is what got to Jimmy. As if he's the only one to ever pay attention. He had lost himself staring at the slightly horizontal stripes of water as the car moved forward, and how they cautiously turned vertical whenever they had to slow down. To him, this felt like a very sad wave. Maybe his father was trying to tell him something. His mind swirled into questions being answered by nobody. This inevitably led him to believe he would never be in control, as he believed his father and stepmother to be. His father was once a playful man, a man who would do anything for his son. Jimmy suddenly had a flash of light hit his mind, and a feeling of friendship overcame him. His pocket glowed bright before fading. He thought about an imaginary friend he had once had and how they used to adventure together. Now he couldn't even remember the name he designated it. What was my imaginary friend's name called again? He blurted out. What? A seemingly annoyed voice answered. I used to have an imaginary friend, and I forgot its name, a very timid voice repeated. Fred or something. Why? You told us he was a ghost. Kinda spooked us, she calmly replied, seemingly relieved. Okay, Jimmy whispers as he looked out into the rain-covered window, contemplating whether to believe in his younger self or try to learn his half-parent's perspective. Fred the ghost. What a fun guy, he accidentally whispered aloud. Silence continues after he catches himself. Relieved he wasn't heard, or more realistically, relieved he was ignored. The sad fact of the matter was, unbeknownst to Jimmy, she was holding herself back from falling apart herself. She was simply happy he wasn't sharing her torment. The memories rushed into his head as fast as a rocket, fleeting images of a decrepit old man, a bony man that looked like his father, but even older as he was now, presently dead, left him in a state of unease. A shiver ran down Jimmy's back as he discovered he had more questions than answers. His mind raced as fast as a child's mind could, and tears formed in his eyes and his nose felt stuffed. Everything started slowly, then gained momentum until he lost control of himself. Every chance to get air was stifled by mucus and tears. He simply couldn't breathe. He was in so much seemingly random turmoil. He started to fear for his own life. He could exhale, but had no possibility of inhaling. His last option was to scream as loud as he could, but as his last conscious thought lingered, as he couldn't exhale, he found slight solace with the view of rain collecting in the corner of the car's window. Gaining silence each second, a calmness engulfed him. He wakes up in bed. His bed. His mother is humming a familiar song. His real mother. The song was unrecognizable, but he knew it nonetheless. As he sits up, he hears a gasp as she runs to him and embraces him deeply. He's unable to breathe and has his first sense of déjà vu overcome him. He throws his arms around her and hugs her even tighter. She suddenly calls an order with so much regal beauty in her tone. He feels at home without understanding the words. She slowly releases her grip simultaneously with Jimmy. Footsteps are heard sprinting down a nearby hallway. Another familiar face pops up, and Jimmy cannot help but smile. His face contorts until he believes everyone could see all his missing teeth. He feels embarrassed, but with an adrenaline-fueled amount of happiness. It was his father, just as he remembered him as a younger child. This was confusing at the time, since Jimmy could still picture looking at his dead father's gauntly made-up face just hours before. How could he care? This is proof his parents were still alive. He shouldn't question anything. This is what he wanted. They both hugged him and explained how much they missed him. Jimmy, as confused as he was, could not understand what they were saying. He was simply too overjoyed. They end the warmest embrace Jimmy has ever experienced, and he feels the need to cry. "Don't let it end, please," he whimpers, holding tighter. "Never," they both announced concurrently. They lied, as they took Jimmy by each hand respectfully and led him down the ultimately familiar but altered lengthily hallway. He sees a painting he has never noticed, and within it he sees smoky movement in the shadowed corners and darker paints. Nothing out of the ordinary there, he thinks to himself as he is playfully rushed down the hall towards the kitchen. The corner may have been the scariest part. Neither parent was slowing down. He felt his feet dragging. He was being pulled so fast. He felt his toes start to warm up from the friction. Everything felt like it was going faster with no way of stopping. He thought this was the end of his life. He was about to scream. Suddenly, he's in the view of the largest table he has ever seen. The world slowed down. The table was nothing compared to the amount of delicious-looking food that filled it. His ability to smile was competing with his thoughts at this point. "We'd hope you would wake up later. Everything is still hot," they both exclaimed concurrently. Without a thought, Jimmy ran towards the nearest plate, then to the table, then slowed his pace as he approached. The food looked spoiled. Some looked like it was never food to begin with. Some looked like giant bugs squashed against the table itself. He swings around towards his parents and sees them both on the ground, withered away. His father with the same suit and face he was buried in, and his mother, bones and whatever else preserved in a decayed, flowery dress. A quick look back in the table, and the food was just as it was before. Another turn reveals his smiling parents looking towards him with the warmest glow emanating from them. Another turn reveals his smiling parents looking towards him with the warmest glow emanating from them. The fear Jimmy felt was beyond what even he could imagine. He felt alone in the world, but still believed in this hollow love. He refuses to keep what he just saw in his mind. He looks towards his mom and slyly asks how she is. She turns her head and she says she's perfectly fine, but her tone is puzzling, even to Rocky. "How could you be fine if you're dead?" he asked with a relaxed, muted tone. Jimmy stares at his mother, as if he expected a response. She just turns her head unnaturally to the side as if to ask him what was wrong. This makes Jimmy step back before both parents' eyes dart towards him, making his uneasy feeling grow to fill the room. He tripped backwards towards the table, and before he could hit his head, everything slowed down again. A black cloud protects his head. However, as he hits it, it starts to dimly shine. The color is unrecognizable. An almost perfect but muted pink rose color. He can't help but think of his old friend, Fred. Fred had been there with him through thick and thin. There was a flash, then nothing. He was suddenly aware of his unique surroundings. A realization of never coming home from the car ride shoots in his thoughts faster than his parents' recollection of the world in front of him. Suddenly, Jimmy was in the waking world, on a shabby couch, with a cold metal sheet covered in once-cooked fries. with a puddle of ketchup laying on him. His favorite food, 3 years ago. Jimmy was always a lonely child, even though his stepmother had a son of her own. Of the same age, yet 3 days older. He never let Jimmy forget it. Johnny had to be from another planet, he often thought to himself. He spied on what was going on around him before daring to move. The room was void of emotion, even when someone on the television made a joke. Neither person in the room was truly paying attention to the bulky TV. They decided Jimmy would not wake, even in his clearly uncomfortable position. His arm was digging into his side, and a baking sheet was delicately placed on his opposite side. He believed this was some sort of security for their conversation. He listened as if he's never done before. "Where's Mr. Joe?" a shrill voice asked. "He's gone, my dearest," she spoke with the most loving tone. "So, is my cake okay?" the voice excitedly shrieks. "Yes, it's in the fridge, my big birthday boy." Her voice seemed so peaceful before continuing. She subtly hints to their current predicament. "I'm just glad you never have to see that gauntly face again." The young boy chuckles to himself, evidently feeling pride in something malicious. The silence became much more distinct before the same shrill voice decided to interrupt. "Why isn't he awake? Shouldn't he be awake? It's my birthday. I want cake," he erupts, tension growing with every word. Jimmy's face twitched in anger and evidently was noticed because Jimmy heard his stepbrother exclaim, "He moved! How can he move if he's asleep?" His heart began to race, thinking he'd been found out for his eavesdropping. Luckily, his stepmother disregards this and continues to stare at the television, sipping from her rose-tinted glass. Moments later, Johnny walked over and started to poke him. After just a second poke, young Jimmy erupted into anger towards his stepbrother and nearly threw his fist towards him. Luckily or unluckily enough, the older child fell back onto a coffee table head first, with a loud bang, resulting in his turn to sleep. As soon as Jimmy can comprehend what has happened, he looks over towards his stepmother, seeing her run towards him, and slaps Jimmy so hard he could see spots of color wherever he looked for a solid couple of seconds. He thought to himself that he must be feeling the same as his stepbrother right now. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe they both did. A feeling of deja vu yet again filled Jimmy's head. A knock on the door released the tension for a second, but the realization of what that meant threw the two people, still conscious, into a loop. "Go open that door, now," she hissed, peering, not even looking at Jimmy, but past him. "Oh, okay," is all he could say. As he walked to the door, he peered back to see her carrying him gently towards his bedroom. His bedroom, as you'd expect from a spoiled brat, was the master bedroom. His mother decided on that even before they moved everyone into this cramped house. Even a simple thought of the love she shows for his half-brother makes him sick. Jimmy thought about his mother and remembered her smiling face from his dream. Then remembered her portrayed as a practical skeleton in a dress. He finds himself at a door and has a moment of hesitation before opening it. He opens it after what he hopes is a couple of seconds, and a hideously disdained face slips inside without even a glance at young Jimmy. "Aunt Aiden, no," he accidentally whispers aloud. "Shut up and close the door," she snaps back, without a single look. Aiden is Jimmy's stepmother's youngest sister, surprisingly rude towards Jimmy right off the bat. She has never seemed to like Jimmy, or even Rocky for that matter. Even with her nerve to answer a whisper with a hiss, she seemed to be overjoyed, as if it were a celebration to be there. A scream is heard after she somehow instinctively walks into the master bedroom. Aiden comes stomping out in a mad dash towards Jimmy. As she is near, she hesitates and simply berates him, saying he needs to be careful not to hurt her precious nephew. Jimmy is in shock. He still doesn't understand what happened. He thinks back to his dream and can only imagine food left out for what looked like years. The thought led him to remember the pan of fries and ketchup that had fallen from him during the commotion. She either distances herself or retreats to the master bedroom while Jimmy was thrown back into his own head. What a mess, he once again thought aloud. And this is the last quarter of Rose-Colored Glasses, Chapter 1, Part 4. He searches for supplies and begins to clean up the mess somebody had supposedly trapped him with. But before he could finish, a small group of people appeared in front of him. He looks up and sees Johnny sobbing and pointing at him. Without warning, a slap is thundered into him across his left cheek, then a second across his right cheek. Those were from the women of the household. A sudden white flash and a tinge of pain from his right eye. Jimmy realized his brother had punched him in the face. Seconds turned into minutes before they turned into days before he realized he might never again be able to use his right eye as well as he once had. A resentment grew in Jimmy he would never be able to establish. A new, adaptable habit of staying in a small inherited room became the norm within a couple days. The lock once used to keep unsolicited visitors from entering Rocky's room was now used to keep him inside. He felt happiest in his father's room, so he agreed without thought. Aiden had decided he was too dangerous to keep around unsupervised, so she happily volunteered to stay rent-free, as she surely planned. She seemed to have a knack for letting him down specifically, he thought. Sleep became Jimmy's solace from his waking life. His father had done the same, why not him? In his dreams, his bad eye was better than ever. In his dreams, he could see further than he ever could in the waking world. In the waking world, he was cold, but when he dreamt, he felt warmth. The only thing he craved. He has become addicted, just like his father, but much, much sooner in comparison with their age. Presently, he was running with the plan to run fast enough for liftoff. He didn't know where he was, nor did he care. He just wanted the freedom he knew he could achieve if he believed hard enough. Believing is what he felt he needed, so it became his simple religion. He sped up and continued to speed up until he no longer had to move his legs. He was flying. He thought to pose like Superman, maybe a genie gliding across the sky with his arms crossed. He did neither, but pretended to sleep in the air instead, making fun of himself in some strange way. He knows the only way down is a crash landing, but lately he simply hasn't cared and knows dreams are dreams after all. This time, though, he fell onto the earth with a sickening crunch. He had his eyes closed as he instinctively knew from the first crash, but this one didn't end with him being jolted awake. He felt everything. He must have landed on his feet unintentionally because they were half buried in the mud, and the other half appeared within a touching distance away. He viewed a rainbow, yet felt nothing towards it. Initially trying to ignore his current predicament, he hadn't realized it was raining. After all, it was not raining moments before. Then his cognizance kicks in. He looks downward and sees a blood pooling slowly around him in what appeared to be all the places the initial crunch sounded. Some buried in the rainy earth. He regrettably looked to his left. He sees bones poking out of red-smeared pieces of meat he could only describe as jelly. He looked further down the arm to find fingers angled in impossible directions, pointing towards every direction he should have gone. He looked towards his right and found his crooked arms bent impossibly around him. Both of them. He again searches his body before finally realizing he hasn't been here for more than a single second. He knows he will die soon, but the innate feeling of his numbness for life slows any regret. Then he peers up, hoping it was simply another dream. What appears above him reflects his own face, unrecognizable, covered in blood and mud. Previous feelings of deep funereal sadness matched the pace of his thoughts at the time. He cannot move anything but his eyes, seemingly the only things undamaged. That didn't last for long, though. His right eye slowly filled with a black cloud, starting opaque before consuming all his sight, even starting with his left eye before. Jimmy woke up to the sound of pounding on his door. Johnny, his rotten, not even half-brother, had decided to greet Jimmy's birthday with a very welcoming wake-up call. Even though he was very annoyed, he was happy Johnny didn't say anything to him. Maybe that was his gift? Jimmy opened the door where the knock emanated and tried to squeeze himself out. Usually, Johnny holds the handle tightly or only pretends to take the lock off. But today, Jimmy heard it fall to the ground. Why is he having so much trouble getting out? He asked himself. The lights in the hallway are still off, as usual, but the door felt so heavy to him. Suddenly, the lights come on and Aiden pops out from behind the door with a wicked smile and looks at Jimmy's shocked face. She laughs while pointing her crooked finger somewhat towards him. Johnny sprints down the hall I used 2 years ago, and surely he plans on running into the room I used to run into, Jimmy thought. Before he knew it, pugilist Johnny punched him on the arm, and before he could say ow, Johnny spewed from his cake-filled mouth. Happy birthday, pitch. Jimmy had heard the word bitch more than once in his life at that point. He has never been called one before. One may argue he still hasn't. That didn't stop Aiden from laughing again and claiming she told him to say it. Jimmy was hoping Johnny was eating his 3-day-old cake and not the one Jimmy bought from his last few years' birthday money his father gave him. Jimmy stares off in thought. Of course, he finished his cake. Look at him. He's trying to eat his cake and eat mine too. This world makes no sense, he thought to himself. Jimmy stays so calm he scares himself. He saw and eerily felt blood, bone, and gore. He remembered so very clearly. This doesn't compare, he thought. The cake doesn't mean anything anyway. He was able to keep some of the cash his dad personally gave him. It felt special, but nothing could compare. Jimmy had learned he could see the orbs, even with his slightly blind eye the past couple days. He slowly peered around in his own room, looking lost, then instantly looking for something. He found a slightly brighter glow of the most beautiful color he could ever imagine, emanating from a small box in the closet out of sight of his tormentors. He retrieves one of the orbs and begins his day, hoping to find out if this one will stay with him or stay with its twin, or hopefully both. Feels lighter. It shrunk? He accidentally whispers aloud. What? The other two say at the same time, both giggling with hands and mouths filled with cake. Nothing. Happy birthday, I guess, Jimmy said with a sigh. He walks back out of his room, completely ignored and happy about that fact. Down the hall, he noticed a similar painting, but something is different. It looks much darker than normal. He shrugs it off as his recent increase of imagination. He turns the corner by holding the door frame and swinging his body into the kitchen. He has done this his whole life, making sure not to mess up his height marks from when he was younger. This time he knew he had made a mistake because his stepmother was waiting for him with a glare that could only mean he was in trouble. He almost tripped on his own 2 feet after seeing her face. She stayed silent for a while, as she tends to do. Suddenly, she raises her rigid voice. "Happy birthday! You're 10 now? I don't believe it." Even a child could tell something was very wrong with this situation. She mentions that her late husband used to give him birthday money. She made an innocent gesture as if she's never heard of such a thing. She had been with Jimmy's father for just under 5 years. Jimmy used to believe she and her father were a perfect match. They both used to go out every weekend with him for some type of adventure or another. However, slowly but surely, she inevitably revealed her son Johnny after learning of her late ex-husband's passing. She was currently trying to turn the narrative into Jimmy owing her the money her late poor husband stupidly gave him. Behind Jimmy comes a screaming, thumping Johnny into the kitchen. "I found the cash!" Jimmy felt something snap deep inside of him and instinctively attacked his stepbrother. The coward always backs away, he thought. This time Jimmy was quick enough to be successful. He took the money back but hadn't realized he had ripped the bills in half. He didn't care, as long as he at least had a piece. They came from his dad. These people obviously did care. The screaming that came after was enough to get Aiden away from snooping near his father's old room or eating his cake. The first slap didn't hurt, but the one that came from Aiden stung. Maybe it was the momentum, he thought. She giggled, as if it were some sort of joke. Without any type of warning, Johnny punched him in the arm as hard as he could before he slumped forward towards Jimmy and whispered, "Pitch." She giggled again. Jimmy wondered if she told him to do it that time too. It wouldn't surprise him. She had all the worst traits of her sister and more. She wasn't allowed to come over due to Rocky's apparent disdain for her, but now that he's gone, she felt the need to take control. "Just take the other half. We can exchange them at the bank," a jagged voice rang. Jimmy all but gave up hope then and there. The one person he believed might have the smallest chance of being nice to him was being cruel. He began to sob and dropped the money on the ground. The pieces scatter as Aiden, along with Johnny, scramble to pick up every single one. They appeared like piranhas from Jimmy's watery perspective, leaving nothing but bone in their wake. He looks up to his stepmother as she pours her second glass of wine that morning. "You do look like him, you know, especially as of late." She stares down at him with no emotion and continues. "When he cried, he looked like you as a baby. And now when you cry, you look exactly like him." She sips her wine slowly, places the glass down on the messy counter, and kneels to his height. She made sure to stay taller than him and asks in a mockingly sweet voice, "What would you like as a birthday present, my sad, growing boy?" The shock of the question may have well been a pleasant surprise if not for what had just been said previously. He can't open his mouth. He's too choked up from tears and trying to understand what his new life has become. He shakes his head to and fro violently, gets up and sprints down the hall, passing by Johnny and Aiden as they mock him for crying on his own birthday. His stepmother just stood up, turned, then grabbed her glass and sipped. He runs into his room and slams the door shut. This room had no windows like it once did before it was remodeled to be smaller for his father. His stepmother believed if he was going to be sleeping all the time anyway, he may as well not take up too much space. That made sense to everyone at one point in time. Now this room was a prison. The lock that was once inside is on the other side. Without a blink, everything changed for Jimmy. There is no other way to lock the inside but to clutter the door with his shabby furniture. He pushes his small desk and heavy dresser filled with his father's clothes in front of the door before hearing a smack on the wall besides the door. Somebody was right outside, and by the sound of it, it was either Johnny or Aiden. Aiden was his stepmother's youngest sister, but the age gap between them was significant. She was only 6 years older than Jimmy and her nephew. His mother was around the same age as his father, so he never gave that a thought. An aunt acting as childish as his stepbrother, though. That could never be expected. She shared the maturity Johnny displayed and outgrew it, made it her own, and graduated to top of her class in being mean to poor Jimmy. He tries to push more items in front of the door, but to no avail. It was Aiden after all. She pushed the door inward with much unexpected might, sliding the dresser, spilling clothes, spreading them around with seeming ease. She barged in, angry about her nephew not being able to enjoy the festivities because he started crying. "I want to be alone," Jimmy blurted, to apparently nothing. "Why do you have to ruin everything? Why can't you be more like Johnny?" she sneered. The thought of anybody comparing Jimmy to Johnny would enrage him. Rocky Joe knew this. He made sure to separate the two as far apart as possible. Rocky's loving new wife, her son, and her sister. He accepted his wife and tried his best to accept her son in his own family, knowing only Jimmy was his only son with the woman he was truly meant to be with. Aiden had been known as the troublemaker of their family. She was young enough. Her aging single parents spoiled her rotten before being bedridden and dying himself. Rocky made sure to tell Jimmy stories of his mother, some believable and some clearly made up, but he loved to hear them whenever he could. His late wife's name was forbidden in the household ever since he met his new wife. They told themselves that it would make them sad, and being sad is bad. Jimmy suddenly realized he was in his father's room. He stares at Aiden, his brows furrow. Then, with an almost out-of-body amount of hate in his voice, he demands her to leave. She stands her ground without a word, barely any noticeable thought behind her eyes. Jimmy was forced back into the only safe space he could be in. He had no other place to go. She had taken over his old shabby room, made from half his father's room, remodeled into 2 separate rooms. "Get the hell out of my room," he says, struggling to breathe with every dramatically slow word. "Nah, I think I'll stay," she says as she nonchalantly shoves the entire desk and dresser onto their faces, spilling papers and clothing everywhere. Jimmy moves backward slowly. He thinks of his pen on his desk, the only way to defend himself. He searches for it, unable to find it until he sees it behind Aiden as she steps forward. She ostensibly crawls on her 2 feet towards Jimmy, her face showing no reason to cause harm. He slowed his eyes momentum before she shoved him almost off his feet. He was terrified. She clearly had the physical advantage of being older. She managed to push him with unexpected strength and pinned him to the wall before pushing him gently on his right side onto the bed, and followed suit. She seemingly tossed herself next to him. Jimmy's eyes couldn't help but still stare at the floor for the pen he thought was his only hope. Before he could realize what she was even doing, she slapped her arms around him and started to hug him. Her eyes, recently filled with no emotions, burst, revealing a patched-up dam overflowing once again. She whispered between breaths and sniffles, apologizing remarks repeated profusely. She wouldn't stop. He begged her to stop. He would rather she hates him than forgive her. She started crying and hugging him tighter. He couldn't imagine his cruel aunt crying, let alone trying to hold him. Something switched within his maturing brain yet again. He decided, for the benefit of the doubt, to trust her. He matched her hug and gave her even more. He imagined himself hugging his mom. She wiped her tears away and yelped, "Happy birthday," as she continued to bawl increasingly. And that's it for chapter 1. Thank you so much. I won't be reading any more. By the book. I guess whenever I decide to get it published. Or just ask. You can just ask me. I'll send you the Word document.